I'm in the GIBS studio this morning with two colleagues from GIBS, Abdullah Verachia and Marius Oosthuizen, and we've been working for a year or so on a project called SADA, South Africa in the Digital Age, the pathways to how we develop our economy to be more digital. So welcome to the two of you.
Thank you.
Why is there a need for this particular project, Abdullah?
So Nick, I think if you look at the global economy, there's a big focus in terms of this advent and the acceleration in terms of the pervasive influence of digital technology in all spheres and areas, everything from government to businesses to small businesses in the global economy. And part of that is really to start to appreciate how do we take a considered effort in terms of looking at digital and finding pathways, as you rightly say, for that to become inclusive in nature, and so that we can look at whether the digital economy can create opportunities from an employment perspective, from a revenue generation perspective, and overall an opportunity for it to contribute towards GDP and growth from a country perspective.
So it's an important topic, and we've of course have been in partnership with Genesis locally here, the Gates Foundation and Oxford University at the Verachia School of Government. Marius, what is your sense of the prospects here in the short and medium term?
Well, South Africa, of course, is a unique case where we are an economy that has a digital footprint. We have leading edge banks and financial services sectors that have the competencies in the digital economy, and we've replicated and taken some of our businesses around the world. But of course, we have these deep socio-economic challenges where not everyone in the country benefits from those competencies. And so I think a project like this speaks very directly to the need for South Africa to expand the reach of that capability that we have as a country. When we looked at the project, we looked at digital access, for instance, millions of South Africans that don't have access to cheap, affordable data, that don't have digital literacy per se, which speaks to the need for education reform to enable that. So in the medium term, it really represents a major opportunity for the country to develop a broader set of skills that can speak to the need in this digital economy.
Fantastic. Now we developed three pathways. Would you like to talk a bit to the first that had to do with globally traded services?
So one of the pathways we look at is really this opportunity for South Africa using its competitive and comparative advantages to create, as you rightly say, globally traded services. Have we seen this in other parts of the global economy historically? You think if you look back in the 90s in India, they started a concerted effort in terms of saying, can we create opportunities for globally traded services in such a way that we can put the requisite building blocks in place from an education perspective, from a digital access perspective, from a positioning in the global economy to attract opportunities in terms of globally traded services. I think that was a previous wave, but I think it gives us a good opportunity to look at what is it that we need to put in place to be able to create an opportunity for globally traded services. I think what we do see in one of these pathways is that we're starting to see the opportunities in the platform economy opening up. And that means platforms by their very nature give us the opportunity to connect people who would otherwise not be connected to each other. And that's a phenomenal opportunity and we've seen opportunities in various parts of the global economy where people from Philippines are engaging with people from North America, where people in Latin America are connected to people in Kenya. And globally traded services provide that opportunity to open up some of those valves.
And just to give us a quick example of what a globally traded service is.
So I think one of the opportunities that we've seen is people in the call center environment providing training services here in the southern part of Africa to people in Southeast Asia. And so connectivity and access provides that opportunity.
And already there's been significant success at this. So it's really building on the numbers to take us to maybe 500,000 jobs. Marius, the second pathway is about building a more inclusive, low-cost environment. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I think that often there's a misnomer with digital, that people think that this is really a conversation only about technology. But when you start to unpack the underlying enablers of the digital economy, things like infrastructure, things like spatial access, and also the conception around what is a job. Is a job something you do at a building somewhere in an industrial sector, or is a job something you can do from a coffee shop and anywhere in the world? And so what is needed in South Africa in some ways is a mindset change to understand that we have to target our infrastructural capabilities, lay out the broadband, the Wi-Fi, the 5G. Then we have to think about the spatial inequality that we have. Does a young child in a peri-urban township environment have access physically to the infrastructure? And do they have the meta skills? And this comes into setting up innovation hubs, experimentation places where youngsters can play with the technology, can get exposure to build the digital muscle to then engage that. And then, of course, the third piece of the puzzle is, does business have the vision to say, can we take some of our non-core services out into these kinds of areas, and by placing them there, create a whole new economic life for those communities?
As always, we're going to run out of time, but what is the role of the state in this, Abdullah? How do you see that?
So I think the report speaks extensively about the fact that the state has a fundamental enabling role from an education perspective in terms of the skills that we need in primary and secondary education. The state has an important role to play in terms of access from a broadband perspective and the cost of broadband, the issue of spectrum licensing that we're currently engaging on from a country perspective. Thirdly, the state has an enabling role in terms of bringing different parties together. And all of the parties, if you look at the report, have a critical role to play in terms of this relationship. And perhaps most importantly, the state has an important role to play in terms of policy formulation that allows for opportunities to flourish from this type of environment. And so the state is probably one of the key enablers in terms of opportunities from a digital perspective.
Right.
I think what is important, Nick, is many people speak about the fact that digital will result in job losses. This report gives us the opportunity to step back and take a much more objective view in terms of, can we create access and opportunities in terms of what digital might propose.
Right, and the report lays out the pathways in the short, medium and long term to do exactly that, to turn this from a threat to us to a major opportunity and make South Africa part of the frontier technology. You ran many of the workshops. What was a moment of a highlight, an insight that you recall in the hard work that you did? Anything that particularly stayed with you?
I think 2 points of insight that came for me. The one was that much of the capability, the skill, the visionary entrepreneurship that we would need for this is in the country. The second one is the challenge, which is that a lot of it is uncoordinated, misaligned, and a lack of understanding between the private sector, between government and civil society of what would the role players need to do. And so I think that speaks to Abdullah's point about someone playing the convening role to build the bridges to enable us to do this.
Lovely. Abdullah?
So I think convening capability, I loved the opportunity to engage with an organization that plays in a space where it's created a platform to connect artisans, whether they be electricians or painters or plumbers, with individuals who need these skills using geolocation technology. So simply using an app to be able to connect people who would provide artisanal skills to people who need those services within a specific region. These people, outside of a platform, would be otherwise not connected to each other, and platforms provide that opportunity to connect people who would otherwise not be connected.
Right. So we're now going to go to phase 2 in the next year or so. So I hope you've got something from this discussion, but what does this mean for what we all do as faculty and what we deliver at the school?
I think from us, from a school perspective, we have a critical role to play as a collaborative intermediary institution, this ability to convene, to bring multiple parties together, to engage in some of these critical issues. I think secondly, from a research perspective, is to be able to, in phase 2, deepen the research, look at some of the more practical opportunities that come out, provide some context in terms of, as you say, Marius, opportunities in spatial areas in South Africa that would be otherwise neglected, to provide some kind of a view in terms of how policy should be repositioned. And so I think business schools have a critical role to play in terms of providing some of the knowledge, some of the perspectives, and also some of the convening of different parties.
Fabulous. Thank you both. Marius, you've got a last thought.
I think in many instances, in not just in South Africa, but on the continent, we're caught in a 21st century economy, but with 20th century institutions that often teach 19th century content. And so I think as a business school, the responsibility is ours to be a 21st century institution, to deliver content that's relevant to this digital economy, and then to become an institution that models that to the rest of our community, which primarily is the business sector.
Thank you both for your hard work. We look forward to the next phase of the project, and our sponsors, of course, made this all possible. So a big thank you to them.